Welcome to Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast, where we explore the local arts culture in the Lehigh Valley. We'll be doing this through conversations with individual artists, administrators, and organizations. We'll explore all types of mediums with a goal of enriching local art culture.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Elise.
And thank you for tuning back in.
Yeah, so we have a great conversation coming up with local artist Keith Garubba. Ben, do you want to take it away with his bio?
I would love to. Keith Garubba is a visual artist living and working in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He uses abstraction to restage iconic symbols, charging them with mythic meaning, making works to uplift and mind shift the deep-thinking daydreamers. His works are exhibited regularly throughout Pennsylvania and the United States. He holds leadership roles in regional arts organizations and presently acts as president of the Printmakers Society of the Lehigh Valley, visiting higher education institutions across the country as a visiting artist offering talks and workshops is one of his honors and joys. He is a resident artist at the Banana Factory in Bethlehem, where he holds a studio, participates in community activities, and teaches private lessons. Garubba continues to make work in glass, printmaking, paint, multimedia installations, and interactive performance.
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't tell you guys how excited I am to be here. You've got great digs, and I've been listening to you, and I just think what you're doing for our community, our artistic community is just wonderful. I'm so glad you're doing this.
So we actually saw your work at the House Gallery a couple weeks ago for the opening.
Wonderful.
I am very unfamiliar with the concept of like warm glass or kiln fired glass. So can you explain a little bit more about the process for that?
Some glass artists are working in hot glass. They're blowing their glass. They're working at higher temperatures. And then some artists are working on the glass while it's cold in the studio, doing what I'm doing. I maybe cutting pieces and applying and stacking and maybe printing like I do or painting, and then kiln fusing. So you're getting it up to a temperature not often as hot as, if someone's full on blowing and manipulating the form and getting it flowing. And then some artists are working cold with their glass. So they're carving and they are polishing and cutting and, all this kind of thing.
Very nice. That's such a good little summary.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And, as a warm glass artist, I feel a little bit unsure about describing, the work of others. So I really hope I got that right.
No, I think that a lot of people are more familiar with like blowing glass because there's that show on Netflix now where
Blown Away.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know. I think that it's just people, when you think of glasswork, that's probably what most people think of. But that's what was cool too, I think, about the show that you're in now is it was all different kinds of glass mediums combined into one. So it wasn't just blown glass. It wasn't just like sculpted or cold cut glass. It was everything and everything in between.
Yeah. Well, when that show was first coming together, was, maybe 3 years ago already. I was approached by a couple of artists, Roy Groover and Rhonda Snowart, who are practically my neighbors, and they've got a great facility for fusing glass. And so they were generous with me, and I had been fusing with them for a few years, which you can't beat that. Like, a neighbor's house. Oh, I'll just come on over.
For sure.
Yeah. So I was fusing at their house, and they invited me to show with them. They told me that they had this vision to put together a show of all glass artists in the Lehigh Valley, maybe show off the breadth of styles and approaches and processes that is present here in the Valley.
Yeah.
And, there were bumps in the road along the way. We had one venue lined up, and then for various reasons fell through, and it was kind of a long journey, and we weren't sure where it was going. And then eventually we hooked up with Ward, who runs the Bethlehem House, and he's a glass artist, and he was into the vision, and he had his own vision on top. And so that's how this show took its present form. And it's so great to see it finally come to fruition, because they had this vision a long time ago. Yeah. I think even before they approached me. So it's great.
That's very cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. And it shows a lot of I don't know if there's an official term for it, but the iteration process that art goes through, especially in the way that it's presented. I mean, when it comes to filmmaking, the first draft and the last draft that you see on screen are completely different. And it seems to be time and time again that shows end up being the same way.
Sure. Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah.
It's easy to picture the creative process as, oh, I made a bunch of stuff and then I showed a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in the flow of making things, and then someone starts imagining an exhibition to show that work, and then you're hearing about who else is in the show and you're getting excited and you're getting ideas, your work is zigging and zagging right before you as the presentation is taking form.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And those different forms as well dictate how people could potentially receive it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's funny. That connects right back to what you guys were kind of chatting about while I was finishing my notes with sharing your art on Instagram.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been wonderful because I've been on Instagram for a long time, mostly lurking and then putting up the occasional casual post or whatever.
Yeah.
And then a few posts that I thought presented my art well. And I just didn't take it too seriously. Maybe it was because I was shy about it. And so recently I've been trying to be a little bit more direct about talking about the work and open to talking about the behind the scenes and the more human side to what I was thinking about rather than all the technical stuff. And it's been wonderful because, for me, the art really becomes the art when it's connecting. And I guess I'm cautious to say that I like making art for Instagram because that's not what it's about for me, but it's so nice to, connect with your audience, another way, sometimes in the middle of your work. And then, maybe it's taking that feedback back to the studio or ignoring it, but just knowing it's there. It's been sparking conversations for me, Instagram. And it is nice because the circle becomes completed. It's the audience talking back to you and then you making more work. And, it's beautiful that way.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's funny. I'll use your word. I spend a lot of time lurking on Instagram, whether I'm just looking at my personal page or I do stuff for work or for the podcast. And I think, I notice all of the comments, I read through the comments on a lot of posts because I like to see who's looking at who else's stuff. And I very much wonder from your perspective, is it more people who from the community or is it other artists that you work and collaborate with? Who's giving you those comments and that feedback on your stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question because that's what's been so surprising to me is the different actions of different kinds of people on Instagram. And a lot of it are other creatives or people I know from this and that and friends. But then there's also the kind of Instagram lurker who never would ever like a thing or comment. And then you see them at the next thing and they're saying oh, that thing you said about this, it's real life conversations. Yeah. IRL is wonderful. And when I think I took that for granted that, likes are nothing. Maybe all these other people read it, paused for a second. Likes are nothing. Yeah. And, but I've also reconnected with people. There's a Lehigh Valley artist who moved to London or to England anyway. And I hadn't spoken to her in years. And then I started getting more active on Instagram and, she's a very generous person on there. And we've been having all these great conversations, both in our posts and just DMs. And so, I guess it's been surprising who I talk to. And, it's nice when you get a little attention from a stranger, I guess.
Yeah. I always wonder, I hesitate to comment on stuff for people I don't know, but now I feel like I want to go and be like, I love this, great job. You're doing so good. Keep going. It looks amazing.
Yeah. I'm learning that, right? You want to be giving. Yeah, I mean, that's the community part. I'm trying to get better at that too, but it's easy to be shy, right?
Yeah. It's Instagram's like its own little gallery show. Don't they even call the landing page the gallery?
Yeah.
It's its own little gallery show.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, totally.
That's funny.
A couple weeks ago, I posted a photo. I think it was experiment in layering number 1, which was a picture of a house right across the street from the studio. Okay. And the person that owns the house finds it, reposts it, and they start commenting. They're like, oh my gosh, that's my house. That's so cool. And it was the weirdest, most fun and unexpected conversation that I had with someone in a very long time on Instagram.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Oh my gosh. Wait, that's really funny because I just posted the other day a little mug that I did in like one of those wine night pottery workshops at the art establishment. And someone that was either taking a class there, they didn't really say, but they messaged me and said, "Oh my God, I saw that like on the firing shelf." In the studio. I was wondering whose that was, and I was like, "Who is this person?" Like my account's not public, so it was someone that follows me or I follow them. But I thought it was so funny. But it is very full circle. You're right.
Yeah. Well, you know what I really dig about that is, you know, I think a lot of us. Well, a lot of creatives end up on Instagram because they've got these big eyes about the thousands of followers that they want, and then the moments that light up your life are these like little things like, oh wow, that's a person that saw my work on the shelf. Like it's the real life stuff.
Yeah. When you came in today, I was saying, yeah, well, I saw Keith's this piece at the House Gallery, the one that he submitted. But then he sent a photo and then I saw it on Instagram and then I was reading his little story about it and I was like, oh, I like that piece a lot better now because or I connect to it more because I read the little story and it's like all this crisscross between like Instagram and then seeing it at the gallery and then seeing it here and then seeing it on email. It's kind of funny.
Right.
Definitely.
I think that the best artworks unravel themselves to you over time. And I would hope that a work could stand alone aside from this, whatever statements I attach to them. But if the statements can accelerate that unraveling, maybe that's what I really hope from like all, you know, all this kind of all the posting one does and, you know, in all these different places. I hate the idea of planting an idea in someone's mind before they form their own opinion. But if it can leave it open enough and still let it unravel a little bit faster, I think that that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'm glad to hear about that experience. Yeah.
Was that the taillights piece?
It was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Sure.
Or multiple taillights pieces.
Yeah. Like the ones has like 3 panels, I think.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Those little amulets that I've got, right?
Yes.
That are, yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. As you mentioned, you have listened to a couple past episodes, and we do audio descriptions for some pieces. So I'd love to get into the first one that you sent in. This is Midnight Pilgrims #1, created in 2020. It is silkscreened and painted enamels fused on glass. It is 28 by 22 inches and 1/4 inch thick and sits on a steel floor stand. This piece is a rectangular glass panel that sits in portrait orientation in a thin black steel floor stand. This piece is abstract and done mostly in shades of black and gray with an overall shadow to the piece. While appearing a bit blurred, the viewer can see the road that curves from the bottom left of the piece and narrows towards the center, cut off by 2 converging mountains. The road is lined on one side by the steep rocky mountain base and on the other by a thin roadside fence. Running along the curve down the center of the road are 2 red blurred lines that narrow and cut out a view where the mountains come together.
Wonderful. I love it. It's just so nice to hear that come out of someone's mouth. And I mean, it's on point descriptively.
Yeah.
But it's fun as the maker to imagine the writer, you going through that looking experience and investigating. So it's kind of fun to imagine that.
Yeah,
to hear you speak.
I hope I did it justice.
You sure did.
I struggle between. So traditionally, audio description is this very like unbiased thing. You just report back what you see, but I'm seeing more, especially because of the last year, people being stuck at home, not being able to experience art in person. Like definitely a more immersive like audio description experience. So something that maybe does tell you a little bit more about the viewer's experience seeing it or that kind of thing. So I tried to be as unbiased as possible in my description, but I think my personality comes through a little bit. I think.
Of course, you can't help it, right?
Yeah,
anyone can't help that, but I think it's very unbiased and but on point and describes it. Yeah, that's great. That piece is what that whole series is named after. I've kind of called the project Midnight Pilgrims, and it's all these taillight works, including those little ones you're talking about that are literally in your face taillights, kind of reoriented and isolated. It leads into a lot of the ideas that I'm thinking about with this body of work. For most of my work, you know, I make abstract works they restage iconic imagery and symbols and try to suggest something magic or mythic about that. Creates these metaphors, or I create narratives to support them. But I like the idea of taking these kind of graphic, punchy symbols and restaging them so that they have that mythic or sacred power. And with Midnight Pilgrims, I was thinking about the way that so many representations of speeding cars at night, as seen in time-lapse photography, don't represent what I really experience when I'm on the road. And so what I wanted to do was, instead of suggesting these like fast swooping, speeding people all going on this like very still landscape, I wanted to kind of make an unreliable landscape that wasn't very invested in the beauty of the landscape, but where all the investment comes in the focus on these taillights. And so I wanted to apply all these clumping marbleized bits of red and make them almost stutter and staccato across that bend, and think about all the individual people who have been on that road. You know, I kind of like to romanticize, I guess.
Yeah.
And feel like I'm just one of them and we're all one because of this. And I guess that's what that formally is about for me.
It's funny because when I was writing the description for this, I was looking at it thinking, this is kind of like what the road looks like from the mountains perspective. Like the mountains are stationary, the road is stationary, and over time they see all these cars kind of going through on the same roads, the same kind of concept where it's from a different perspective.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
That's the same kind of approach to trying to see something that's not literally before us, but almost like more animistic and see. My other bodies of work have sort of flirted with that, like the idea of animism, like what if these paint drips are living things, you know, and I've played with that. And so when I transition to a work like this, some of that language goes away, but I'm really interested that you would bring it back in, you know, like from the perspective of a mountain, you know?
Yeah, I think, I don't know why my brain is thinking of this in correlation with this piece. It's so unrelated, but are you familiar with, it's a Disney short. It's called The Lava Short.
You know, I was kind of hoping that maybe we could talk a lot about Disney tonight, because I've got a 2-year-old and it's pretty much what I'm really an expert at. So yes, I'm familiar with that short. Yep.
So the reason I think, I'm trying to break it apart in my head, but I think the reason is the same kind of concept as that mountain perspective, where the volcanoes had this long span of time where they were sitting in the ocean, witnessing the world go by around them.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what I meant with that concept of this is the road from the mountains perspective, is the taillights, like you don't see taillights in this like a continuous line. This would be more of like a time lapse kind of thing.
Yeah.
So for a mountain, time moves very slow, or for a volcano, time moves very slow. So you're kind of seeing like from their perspective, not only what it looks like, but like how slowly time is moving, that the taillights just look continuous.
Sure. Yeah.
That might be way too abstract.
No, totally. And you know, I think with this kind of zigzag dancing quality of these lines that I gave to those taillights, I was almost imagining to sort of feed into what you're saying. If you were that mountain and you saw every single person that went by and you only had in your memory a snapshot of each and every one of them, and then stacked all of those on top of each other, it would be a lot more like clumsy looking and yet unified. Yeah. And, you know, and I kind of feel like, oh man, maybe I'll get maybe I'll over romanticize this, but I kind of feel like that's what human togetherness is anyway. It's all clumsy and we don't all fit into one mold, but there are momentary things that bring us together, like a road.
Yeah,
definitely.
Wow. That's so cool. I really do like this piece. And just for those listening, to clarify, this does not in any way actually resemble the Lava Short in color or theme. This outstanding color in this is very much the red taillights, and then the other parts of it are very much like grays and blacks and white. And
Yeah, very cool tones.
shadowy.
Yeah. But that is a great animation. I mean,
Oh yeah.
Well, I play the ukulele, so like I'm obsessed with that song. It's so cute, and it's only like 4 chords. It's really easy.
Yeah. So Disney, if you want to talk about making this piece into an animated feature, we could talk about that.
We're trying to form a Lehigh Valley Avengers, and we'd like you to join.
Yeah, I'm all into that. That sounds wonderful.
The Lehigh Valley Art Avengers.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Lehigh Valley Art Avengers. That's fun. It's got a ring.
I like it.
Very true.
Yeah.
My introduction to art was through comic books. The thing that actually it's kind of fun that this would organically come up, but my first art training was this book called How to Draw the Marvel Way. Have you guys seen this book at all?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful book. It's like written in the voice. It's written by Stan Lee and very much in his voice. And then the art lessons are all illustrated by this guy, John Buscema. And I just, when I was young, I really wanted to be a storyteller, and I realized that drawing my stories was like a way to have full control. I could do it. It felt accessible. It felt like, oh, all you need is paper and pencil. And then that book made me feel like the tools are available and you could just do it. And if you learn to draw everything, someday you could tell any story. And that was that was how I really got into wanting to be an artist. I wanted to be a comic book artist. And that became my interest in printmaking because of the printedness of comic books. When I was studying art in school, I was very few schools have comic programs, and I didn't go to one that did. And so I was starting to learn fine art, and I took a printmaking class not knowing anything about it and started connecting the dots like, commercial printing is just an extension of like all these traditional forms of printing. And a lot of the first comics were prints, were like handmade prints and engravings and things like this. And I fell in love with printmaking. So that's actually my training and background is as a printmaker first. I know we're looking at glass art, but the glass I feel is an extension of my practice, and I kind of orient myself. My center as an artist is drawing and printmaking.
Okay.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So your education background was that all in printmaking, and then you kind of grew into the glass art?
Yeah. Well, when I was in school, and this is the best lesson I learned in art school of anything, was I was learning printmaking. I had an awesome, I don't want to downplay, it's not just about my romance with comics and, boy, that's my hot word today, romance. It's not just about my relationship to comics and print. It's also like about great mentors, you know what I mean? And access to mentors. I think that's the value for me of some art schools, right? Is if you can find that mentorship. And I found someone in printmaking who I really resonated with. And so it was fantastic. But I was also connecting with someone over in sculpture. And that person pointed out to me that there's a way to print on glass and there's money out there. Why don't you go get a research grant and just teach yourself how to do it? And that lesson that you can teach yourself anything, wow, that set me up for a lot of confidence in art for the rest of my, career. And so that's how I learned how to do it. I got a school research grant. And so it really was pretty close to my beginnings in printmaking that I was doing the glass works, but that's how it happened. It was kind of like a crossover moment between teachers and mentors, and just realizing you can learn any of these things. And frankly, if you teach yourself, you might learn to do it a new way that might be great, Yeah.
Yeah. You might be creating something that no one's really thought of because you have the option to go from printmaking to glass making or whatever it might be. That's very cool.
Yeah.
In line with saying, if I can learn to draw anything, I can tell any story. And what you just said now, which is if I can learn it, I can do it. How does the abstract part come into it?
Oh, wow. Great question and very finely put together. I love it. So abstraction was not anything it's kind of funny because even today, I'm an abstract artist. I'll own that, and I do love a lot of abstract art, but it's not what I look at mostly for my inspirations. And when I first started learning printmaking, I was getting it really excited about some of the possibilities with silkscreen printing, with stencil printing, because I realized like this is a process that could allow me to create these compositions using pre-made shapes that for me, I was doing digitally. So it was a way to like bring the digital into the physical world and then physically put together these larger compositions. And because it didn't have to go through a press, you can make these big pieces of paper with silkscreen. And so I was getting excited about kind of like the possibilities of building these big compositions. And right in the middle of learning that stuff, I had like a big life moment. And I had a special needs uncle who lived with us as a family. And he was a wonderful man. And he too was an artist. He loved to paint. And suddenly, and by nothing very explainable, medical anomaly, he died. It was very quick and we lost him. And it was heartbreaking for our whole family. And, it was kind of like a turmoil moment, and I was searching and going inward, and at the same time in college and just busy and doing all these things. And I think I went deeper into my artwork. And so to that idea of like, oh, I could just build these big compositions with this process, I started thinking about like, well, I'm dealing with stuff and I've got these, like, my ideas were abstract, I was kind of like, I can deal with all these flying things happening in my life if I just make these artworks. And I started producing these rose windows, these representations of round stained glass windows. And that was partially because, I was going to his funeral and experiencing his Catholic world. I wasn't raised Catholic. But so I had a little bit of that outsider angle on that imagery, I suppose. And I was really inspired by the way that that ornamental architectural feature could bring me solace at a time that I wanted it. I needed it. And so I started making my own and thinking about ways that you could code patterns and symbols into those designs, and then take those designs and use them in large compositions where things are happening that might be suggestive of, I was thinking a lot about the fragility of life after that loss. And so I was kind of thinking if I can, illustrate some of these imaginings of how the body works, maybe I can come to some kind of healing place. And so I started making these like metaphorical compositions about the happenings of the body, using this imagery. And so abstraction fell in my lap. It just made way more sense for my ideas. It didn't make sense. My ideas weren't coming to me in representation. They were coming to me in abstraction. And so I chased it. And that's how I ended up being an abstract artist.
Wow.
Sitting here listening to you talk about how you were transforming your healing process into things that you were making for school or things that you were doing while you were in school, I was thinking like, oh my God, artists are just like the smartest people. Like I can't imagine having this conversation with like someone who wasn't having this creative thought process. Like it's amazing the layers of that, like how you went from the imagery of at a funeral to like fragility of life to creating art as a healing mechanism to also I'm going to submit this for like my college class. It's like it's so much all in one package, but it's just amazing.
Right. And it is greatly intellectual and yet so hard to grasp. And I couldn't have said that to you in a very without the narrative that I attached to it. I couldn't have said it to you easy. And so I kind of get why people don't trust artists as intellectuals,
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, I think a big part of advocating for art as an intellectual tool or as something to keep in your toolbox, I like that phrase. I think that it is a little bit intimidating, or maybe it's like a high barrier thing that we could be sitting here talking about the techniques for layering, like this warm glass technique, and maybe someone that's not a creative or someone that's not into this like creative process it's not as easy for them to grasp. So how do we get from like that's not
Yeah.
making art, creating whatever is not your thing to a point where you can talk about that. Like, I feel very fortunate. My parents are both very creative people, and that's just always been my background. I went to school for that. Like, I feel very lucky, but like, I know that's not everyone's deal. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, for me, I think it's largely permissions, you know, and it's holding. So I've done a lot of teaching actually, to support my artwork, but also because I love it. And, I've taught in like community spaces and things like that. And so I tend to focus on children, but I think holding a kid's hand through those formative years and just giving permission to, like, you know, there's not all these rules for art. You just kind of gotta, you know, like these are drawings, a way to think, and painting's a way to feel. And all of these things are important to you having a relationship to the world. And if we can hold their hand through those formative years where they're getting self-conscious, for me, permissions become a big question for how you get people there.
Being a father yourself, how have you been able to build that into your relationship with your child?
Well, you know, I'm going to have to get permission from her dealer before I start talking about her artwork. But she paints every day, actually. We've got an easel set up in the living room, and we kind of set up the circumstances that it could happen on a whim for her. And I thank my family for supporting me and making that happen, because it has the potential to be messy, you know. But if you kind of like, if you're willing to like work through that, you can get a kid to paint every day. And so, you know, she's only 2. And so for me, it's about like just enjoying it, you know, like get the joy in her.
Definitely.
And appreciate her marks. I focus so much on mark making, you know, it's like, oh, is that a swirly twirly? What a great swirly twirly. Oh my gosh. You know, so it's really about that for me. And just experiencing it. Yeah.
Well, do we want to move on to the second piece?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
So the second piece, titled Through and Back Again, made in 2020. The medium is silk screened and painted enamels fused on glass. It is 24 by 30 inches and 1/4 inch thick in a steel wall mount. This piece is a rectangular glass panel that sits in landscape orientation in a thin black steel frame. The background of this piece is done in 2 rectangular panels outlined with a very thin white line that sit over top of clear glass. The rectangular panel on the left is a primarily rusty reddish-brown color. The rectangular panel on the right is a coral color. The top 2/3 of the piece are primarily translucent and appear rippled and billowy in texture. Most of the background is covered in a very thin, white distorted grid. Along the bottom third of the piece is a deep purple wave that slopes from the left to the right and curls slightly at the end. It is blotched with a yellowish gold along the top and a light pink on the bottom. Predominantly in the center of the piece is a midnight blue orb with coral-colored lines crossing over the right side. Just to the right of the sphere is a symmetrical Gothic cross shape. A distorted imprint of the cross wraps around the right side of the orb.
Wonderful. Yeah, totally. I've got the image. That's great. You know, I wanted to talk about this piece because it's not. It doesn't fit neatly into any of the projects, as I call them, or major series of my work that I've kind of cultivated. And, you know, when you make an artwork, sometimes I tend to sweat because I'm imagining talking about it with someone on a podcast someday. No, but like in a gallery, or like I'm imagining, you know, I want to stand behind the work. I want it to communicate something. I want it to be meaningful. And oftentimes the best way to do that is to fit it into, you know, your broader thesis and the ideas you've got going, and to have some focus. And so the idea of making something that you're not so sure about sometimes is really scary when you're making it. And oftentimes it's a good way to sort the potent ideas from the ideas you shouldn't pursue, or the pieces that you should like quit early when they're not working. But then there's these other times that a piece starts coming together for whatever reason. You've got these formal elements that start to jive, and you've got these compositions that start to come together, and it's working for you as the artist, and you think it's saying something, and you just chase it all the way. And for me, I was working on a few different pieces at once, and I had these like kind of motifs happening and these kind of formal elements starting to come together. And they just fit compositionally, and I didn't have it figured out as I was making the piece. And yet I thought that it really worked. It brought in elements from each of those series, you know? So in my Dr. Armbruster Laboratories body of work, I've got these grids. So you mentioned those white grids.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of my work has a digital moment. I've got these digital moments when I'm working on them. I'm playing around on the computer. I make a lot of my silkscreen images on the computer. And so those grids, I started having fun with kind of making these, I guess technically they're Illustrator blends, but I was making sort of these transitions between each of the lines in the grid that would bend and angle away in these different directions over slow transitions. And I realized that if I did that a certain way and I bent those lines away from the center and made it all symmetrical, I started to get these Gothic openings in the center of those grid forms. And I was thinking like, okay, so I've got this architecture thing kind of reminding me of this rose window things, and I was calling them apertures, right? I've got these openings in the middle where the grid is pulling back. And so I was doing that. And then I had all these deep reds I was playing with from the tail lights, and I started kind of like marbling that up behind the grids. And you know, so then I started thinking about the rose window things, and I made this orb that would float in the middle and reflected these bits from that grid, almost like I was imagining, you know, it's abstract space. So you can kind of make up these narratives in your head about physically what's going on if you want. And so I was imagining maybe that orb is rolling over those designs. And then I, at the same time, was doing these technical experiments in glass with building texture up using my enamel colors. And so all those things converged, and I made this piece. And I was happy with it. And I thought that it kind of fit and maybe said something back to all those other works. And, you know, sometimes you think about the work and you want the work to reflect a specific idea, but in the end, you get all these formal moments, you get this vocabulary, I should call it. Mm-hmm. And the vocabulary just works. For me, it did anyway. And so when the vocabulary starts working, it's like, don't stop it. That's gravy. Like, make the work, you know?
You said that this doesn't fit into your other bodies of work. How it seems like those do have kind of a narrative that go along with it. And this does not necessarily.
Sure.
I might be creating one in my brain looking at it, but it doesn't you didn't create it with a narrative in mind kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Totally.
Yeah.
Didn't Warhol had these pieces that were just printed up layers of his older works, right? Yep. Where it's like, it stops making sense, but it's got all the sign. I think he called them, were they retrospectives or something like that? Anyway, there is just this accumulation of imagery that was him and his work and different ideas. And maybe those ideas were the same or maybe not, but they come together and it says something new. And I don't know. Individual audience might have different thoughts about how well those work, but this felt to me like a little bit of that. I had these fragments, put them together, and it still felt like me, you know? Yeah.
Well, I know, actually, Ben, this week you said that in posting photos or what you've been working on, that you consider a lot of it as like a process or like a study or something in what you're working on. Mm-hmm. And that's almost kind of how I see this piece, is like, you've got elements from everything that you're working on, but it came into this combined amazing finished product.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
It's like the digital and the actual glass. And like you said, even the color from the taillights kind of thing. That's very cool.
Yeah. And, you know, there's these moments where, and I'm glad that, you know, thank you. I'm glad that you like the work, and I happen to like the product too. But even if I hadn't liked the product and it stayed in my studio forever, this could be a jumping off piece. This might be the start of a new body. And that's kind of how it happens. And so, you know, I kind of think like being a good artist is a condition of preparedness. You know, it's like about like sharpening that axe and keeping a practice, and half of it is R&D. You know, you're just like researching and trying. And this piece maybe would have been important to me whether I thought it was showable or not, I think.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot with other artists about naming their works.
I kind of, being a comics person, I think there's huge opportunity at the synergy between words and pictures. And so I don't want to miss that opportunity. So to me, titles are immensely important, both for that reason of meaning, but also functionally. Today, it's the most searchable part of your artwork.
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
And so, the titles, I always want it to add something, but not be on the head. You know what I mean? So some of the works stand alone, the imagery alone might not tell the whole story. And I guess I hope that the title brings just enough more clue that a person could get to a place in their head where I'm comfortable with it, but also they could fill in the gaps and I'm comfortable with what they come up with.
Definitely.
Well,
the reason that I brought it up in the first place is because you mentioned that from the beginning you didn't necessarily have a narrative in mind, but the name of this piece is Through and Back Again, which feels very narrative to me.
Yeah,
and I'm curious whether that's a narrative that you're putting on after the fact, or if that's a narrative that you did have from the beginning.
In this particular case, it was very much after the fact. My working title, because I had picked, for me, it's a useful tool to take a picture midway and then see it on a screen and see it in different contexts. And my working title was Gates or something, The Gates or something like that. And so then later I came back to it and I was like, I don't know, that's not vibing because it's not all about the gates. Now I've got this orb and I've got this suggestion of this S curve, sweeping and changing things and transformation. And so I was thinking about, two things that made that title make sense to me. One was that I felt I was returning to older ideas in my body of work that I hadn't been to. So back again, I guess. But also I was thinking about the way that orb with its negative line work, if it rolled over just the right way, maybe one of those puzzles, it could slip through and fall through. So I was just thinking about
definitely,
I don't know. I was thinking spatially through and back again, but I was also thinking in my life about ideas that were coming back to me through and back again,
Yeah, definitely. It reminds me of a lot of great fantasy novels. You could do The Hobbit, Back Again. And Through, it makes me think of Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass, which is also very surrealist, almost abstract at points. And I was curious if either of those brought any kind of an inspiration to the work.
They weren't inspirations, but I love that interpretation. And, see, this is where conversation gets so important because I'm talking about this piece and maybe trying to expose a little vulnerability because I want to talk about it because maybe it's something that leads to different work. Yeah. And so that input means a lot to me, and maybe that's the future.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm about to start my Alice in Wonderland body of work.
Ooh.
No. But that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that narrative sweep idea you're talking about. I mean, you've done you do screenwriting, right?
I do enjoy screenwriting.
Yeah. So you think about these, I've read some, do you know Robert McKee?
I
book
definitely
story?
do.
Yeah.
Yes, I have it on my desk right now.
Do you? Yeah,
yes, I do.
So I'm kind of fascinated by, prototypes and archetypes and, I guess these rules, hard and true rules for narrative that just seem to speak to the human psyche.
Yeah.
And so I'll think more about what you're saying. That's great.
I like the connection to something mythical and something kind of surreal because, this piece is at the House Gallery. And when the three of us went, Elizabeth and I were standing in front of it, kind of talking about it because we were listening to the band and we're standing there looking at it. And I said, what do you think this is? This is very different from a lot of the other stuff that's in here. What do you think when you look at it? And she said, well, the cross is really predominant. And I don't know, maybe something kind of, maybe it's religious focused. I don't know. So we're sitting there chatting about it. And then I mentioned to you when you came in that I immediately thought of this when I saw this piece of the myth of Sisyphus, which is a myth or a fable or whatever. And it's often connected with stories about existentialism and the Stranger and Albert Camus. So it was all combined into one unit. And the myth goes this guy Sisyphus is forever damned to pushing this boulder up a hill, and he's pushing it, and then as soon as it gets to the top it always rolls back down, and no matter what he does, if he tries to hold it there, it's too heavy, it always rolls back down. And the kind of wrap of this myth is that he has accepted that as his fate, so he's not happy, but he is in acceptance of his fate. And what with this this orb or this ball or the boulder or whatever you want to call it, you have a wave that kind of goes down, but then curls back up. So I almost like when I was standing there looking at it, I was thinking like, okay, so if Keith, I wasn't thinking this, but now I'm thinking it, if Keith is Sisyphus and he's standing here rolling the boulder up and it rolls back down, this wave like curls back around. So it like rolls down the hill and then the wave like shoots it back to the top. So maybe there's no need for Sisyphus. Maybe it's just like rolling this orb, this ball is just like rolling around, and that's ridiculously conceptual and like total. That's just an absolute brain dump of what my brain was thinking of when I first saw it. But I'm glad that you had like this similar kind of need to create a narrative out of a piece, because it is kind of chaotic and it is very surreal, and it's maybe, I don't know, it's two totally different interpretations, but coming from the same place of like that need to create a narrative while you look at something.
The title helped a lot with that. For me at least.
Interesting. Okay. I'm thrilled to hear both of your interpretations. It's just wonderful. And when I talk about a lot of my work, I often throw around the word myth and mythic. I'm kind of intrigued by abstract artists that do, like Rothko would talk about tragedy with his work, and it's like, oh man, they're squares of color, and you know what I mean? They're lovely squares of color. I actually think they're magnificent works, but to hear an abstract artist sometimes like lump such heavy language onto something sometimes feels too heavy, and sometimes it's like, that's right on point, but why? It's like, it's like colors and shapes on space and lines, and but I think that you're right. The mind wants to do that. And, you're also just pleasing the young me who wanted to be a storyteller and became an abstract artist. I think that I think narrative is a big part of my process in the background, but that it could end up on the other end, sparking narrative in the minds of others is cool. I think about the way that the humans are kind of grappling with the idea of the end, automatons and, machines that almost think on their own and things like that. And I think often an abstract artwork works the same, where there's this internal logic where things happen and you can almost imagine a physics, even if it's not there. And I think that that's powerful.
This looks like it could be like an album cover or something.
Oh, wow.
And even the grid, I was like, this kind of reminds me of like Tron, and just it's kind of sci-fi. Like there's so much going on. I just really like it.
Well, thank you. So musicians out there, I'm taking commissions for album covers. Let me know. Maybe your friend Ike could. I don't think it fits his mood. I don't know. He can decide.
An album cover photographed from glass. That's just an incredible concept to me.
Well, the jewel case itself could be glass if they want. True. It'll be expensive. But
I was thinking of, so I'm a violinist, and I was thinking of Celtic covers of movie soundtracks, and this is the album of sci-fi movie soundtracks, and this is the album cover. No, oh dear. Yeah. All right, I'll be in touch.
Yeah, let me know. I think that's a lot of artists' dream. I think whether they admit it or not, I think a lot of artists would love that. You know what I mean? To do an album cover.
Oh, definitely.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the artist, like the artist's holy grail, is that you get to collaborate with someone and create something for another medium. Like maybe that's a universal,
exactly.
A universal desire.
Yeah. I'm not the kind of artist that often will talk about music being an inspiration. But I really should say that for the first time with this newer work, this Midnight Pilgrims work, I listened to Paul Simon's Graceland endlessly, making that work, like endlessly, to the point that sometimes a viewer will ask you, how long did that piece take? And I almost want to answer, and how many times I let that album loop. Like, oh, well, that's that's 100 Gracelands.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really good. Listening to an album like all the way through is kind of synonymous with that road trip concept.
Yes,
of
totally.
You're sitting in the car, you listen to something 100 times over or all the way through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would you recommend listening to Graceland while looking at those pieces?
Oh yeah, I think that it might tell you something. Yeah. Well, that cool. He does. That album in particular, I think it does conceptually match the work. And it's a man at a transition moment in his life, thinking about, well, maybe I should take this road trip to Graceland, but also thinking about just, for him musically, world influences in music. And I just think, I was starting to think about the meaning of the drive and the driving experience. And so I actually think it did mean a lot conceptually.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I would kick myself if I didn't ask it, considering I brought it up in a prior episode, but talking about that, the laboratory series that you're working on, you have 4 of those pieces currently on display at the House Gallery.
I do.
And what I brought up was the differentiations between them all. So they all have similarities, but in each one, there seems to be this definitive distinction from the others. Yeah. And I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, those pieces are interesting because they're some of the only pieces in the Dr. Armbruster Laboratories project that are in glass, that I made in glass. There's like 2 others. And it's because, not all of my work is glass. A lot of it's on paper and other. And not all of, we were talking about this before the episode, but Marshall McLuhan, I heard you speaking of with the medium is the message. And when you have a few media in your repertoire, you get to choose like what speaks this message the best, what tells the idea. And I wasn't sure how to make those works at first work on glass or make sense in glass or justify being in glass. And so I tried a bunch of things, and these ones I thought did. And for whatever reason. And in that body of work, for me, there's 2, it's drips as subject or as figure, and it's grids as ground or, background. And so I've got these 2 formal elements. And for me, a lot of the project, aside from like the conceptual idea of making these fake science experiments that told you something about the drip, those pieces were about, well, how do I make the grid really, really have its voice? And so changing the grids was a way to do that, and because the grid became really important to me in those pieces, because on glass, as opposed to on paper, the grid had dimension, which I got excited about. You print that, you fire it, and then it's a few millimeters deep, maybe more. And so then when you drip over that grid, the drip of ink is slightly informed by that grid. It starts, because it has dimension, it's starting to shape it. And so I was like, okay, so the glass is telling me that this grid in this medium is more prominent. So let's play with that now. And so that's what I was playing with. So I started making those concentric grids with the circles just kind of radiating out and doing different things like that. And so 2 of the pieces are very much about exploring that. And then the other 2 with the color are about just getting a little bit goofy with, well, speaking of it, all you Illustrator nerds out there, Adobe Illustrator nerds, playing with just a digital tool of blending. It's this tool in the program that allows you to take these 2 shapes and then click blend, and the computer will try to interpret what would kind of exist between those 2 shapes. Yeah. And so I was really screwing with that, because I was kind of like, okay, I've got these 2 formal elements. One's becoming more important in this glass medium. So let's see what happens when I just blend them. Let the computer decide. And it was so doing these things where it made these spirally shapes that were totally weird. And so I started including those in those compositions too in the background. Yeah.
Yeah. Being familiar with that tool, were you experimenting with the number of steps between them as well?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it's about, this is getting really deep, but making 2 blends and then choosing a shape out of the middle of each of them and then blending those to get to a whole different weird place. And so that, you're stacking computer decisions and you're kind of in control a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
That's so funny.
So cool. I love it. It's so nerdy, but
yeah, totally.
I love it. And it goes along with that Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, and taking the digital medium and pushing it to its limits. It's thinking for itself, but we're guiding it. Right?
Totally, yes.
So we have these 2 shapes that the computer has created based on things that we've input. and then we're choosing which of those things to take and then blend together again.
Yes,
and
totally.
It's so cool.
It is so cool. And, I don't know if it's about curation at that point or, sort of the artful choices you make when you change it to another form. But I'm just I'm obsessed with this art idea of translation. And maybe that's the important part of the artist brain is translating between forms, so the computer's translating and that's fun. I'm getting a kick out of it. But then there's also the part where I translate it out of the computer to make a physical version of something. And I love that back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about the Lehigh Valley and the influence that it's had on both your process and presentation of your work.
I've lived here since 2014. And I grew up not far from here. I grew up in the Scranton area.
Okay.
So, I'm a Pennsylvanian too. I wasn't transplanting very far, but I was living out in Ohio for a few years doing my master's degree at Ohio State. And my wife was out there with me and she finished up her residency and found work back here. We were we had this kind of geographic circle around home because we're both from that area, Scranton area, that we kind of wanted to land in so we could see family sometimes. And she got work here. So we came here. And you know what? It's really cool. I like it here. The scene is cool. And, being from Scranton, coal town up there, it's a coal, it's built on that coal working kind of community and railroads. Yeah, exactly. All that. And, there's that vibe here too of built atop industry and, and a lot of families attached to that working, with that work ethic from that, and so I kind of dig that about the area. I think it's cool. I've heard you guys talk about sort of our proximity to New York and Philly.
Yeah.
That's cool. It's not why I'm here, but it is cool, right? We can hop into the city and, I guess it does tickle the part of the brain that has aspirations in bigger cities. But that being said, I really believe in local art scenes and building the community you're in and having a home base and having an art family elsewhere that aren't tied to, maybe pie in the sky dreams but because I don't know, for most of us, we're going to have these bright shining moments with the people that we happened to be with. And we could miss them because we're thinking about other cities we could be in.
Yeah.
And I think this is a town where I am starting to get to know the other artists here and the other people, and you guys are helping that. and I like it. I'm feeling at home, and I'm not the kind of person that picks up and makes art anywhere quickly. I think I could make art anywhere, but it's going to take me time to acclimate. Yeah. But it's taken me a few years to, find my voice in this place in my life. And I'm feeling there, and I'm feeling like the Lehigh Valley has helped foster what I'm doing right now.
That's super cool.
It's great to hear. Yeah,
definitely. Is there a highlight from being in the Lehigh Valley since 2014 that you'd like to point out?
I taught at the Bomb School in Allentown for a long time, and that was a blast for several years. And while I was out there, I was kind of shaking it up with the Allentown art scene. And I guess professionally, I was just entirely flattered to receive the Arts Ovation Award from, the Allentown Arts Commission for emerging artists that year. And that was 2 years into living here, and it made me feel so welcomed. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, totally. It made me feel so welcomed, and met a bunch of artists there. I think Femi Johnson received one that year, and I got to meet him. And anyway, that was my personal professional highlight.
Yeah,
here in the Lehigh Valley.
So cool.
That is cool. Congrats. That's
Thank
fun.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And now, gosh, I couldn't be more grateful to Ward and the crew over at Bethlehem House. Great gallery, and I'm thrilled to be showing there.
If people would like to buy your work, see more of your work, how can they contact you or where can they find it?
Well, you can always contact me directly. I've got contact stuff on my website. I'll give you my email address. You ready? It's Keith, my name, G as in girl, art, A-R-T at gmail.com. Hey, just email me. But I've got a lot of available works on my website. But while the show is up over at Bethlehem House, please check that out.
Definitely.
And that's up until June 12th, correct?
Yeah.
Yep, very good.
Please do check that out.
Yeah.
Because it is so different to see it. I mean, I'll hang my art anywhere that you want to see it if you just want to see it. But it is really nice to see it in that kind of context where it's presented like it's in a home, a very posh home. So check that out. And you can follow me. A lot of people are just very comfortable having those one-to-one conversations on Instagram. So you could follow me on Instagram. I'm at Keith.Garubba. Yeah, so you can find me there. And can I tell you what I really want people to do?
Yes,
go for
please.
it, please.
I really want people to come to my website, KeithGarubba.com, and join my newsletter list.
You have a newsletter.
I have a newsletter. I'm an infrequent blaster, so I'm not bugging people. When people join me, I just want to be talking to my people. It's like family, you know what I mean? So you can always email back if you're digging something. But the reason I want people to do this is because the world is slowly opening, and I've got opportunities rolling up, that are kind of paced out based on that opening up of the world. And I just want to be able to tell people what I'm doing. But I'll tell you what, are you guys down with me? Are you guys down with me offering a little freebie?
That
your
would be
listeners?
cool.
Only to your listeners, okay? Just your listeners. If you do, I'm sounding so pitchy right now because I'm kind of getting in the voice. I'm getting in the voice of it. But no, if you do sign up for my newsletter on my website, and there's like optional name and mailing address and a little like comment section. If you fill that stuff out, if you're comfortable, you can put whatever in the comment section, just say like Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast or LVA Pod or whatever kind of cool thing you want to do. And if you do that, I will email you a little reproduction print of one of my works, a little limited edition, signed and numbered, 1 out of 100 print just for you.
Oh, that's
just for
awesome.
Your listeners.
Thank you so much. That's so cool.
Yes.
So do that, a little freebie. If that interests you, you can quit my newsletter immediately if you want. No hard feelings if you just want the art. I get it.
I love that you have your own newsletter for like what you're working on. That's so great.
Yeah. Well, so we talked a little bit about Instagram and talking on there, and newsletter is just another way to like so my art, I make my art for like, I imagine the deep thinking daydreamer, and with the newsletter, I'm telling stories. I'm making stories for the deep thinking daydreamer. And that's what it's about. So if that's you, sign up and we can start a relationship. That's kind of what it's about. I want to connect. Yeah. That's all.
That's awesome.
Very
Cool.
Awesome. And then, so the House Gallery show is up until June 12th, so people can check your work out in person there. And then you have another not local show coming up too. You want to plug that?
Yeah, I would love to. So I got one of these taillights, the amulet taillights, got into a show at International Print Center, New York, which is a well-established, reputable printmaking spot kind of devoted to showing print works and educating people about printmaking and all that. And it's quite competitive. I've certainly applied a lot in the past and not gotten in. So I'm thrilled to be in it now. That will go up. Oh, I don't have the dates offhand.
That's cool. I've got it for you right here. It is
you are cool.
June 10th through September 18th of this year.
Wonderful. So, New York is continually opening up more and more. Go meet me there. Let's go. Let's plan a trip.
Yeah. Oh man. Very, very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about your work very openly. And it's great to meet you and chat with you.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I had a blast. You guys are doing a great job. Please keep it up and I'll be listening.
And
that was our conversation with local artist Keith Garubba.
Thank you, Keith, so much. It was really cool to hear about his warm glass art technique and how that related to him as a printmaker and his background as a printmaker. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was super, super interesting. And I think it brings a whole nother layer of depth to all the pieces that we looked at. And so I think it'll really help anybody that wants to go check that out, a deeper level of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. You can look at it on a screen, but his stuff is definitely best seen in person.
Definitely best seen in person, as most artwork
absolutely.
is. Yeah. Elise, would you like to take away the opportunity for the week?
Yes. So Southside Arts District announced a mural opportunity today. They are looking for an experienced muralist to create a street mural at the intersection of 3rd and Adams Street. Please share and/or apply if you're interested by emailing Missy, MISSY, at southsideartsdistrict.com.
Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in this week. As always, I'm Ben.
And I'm Elise.
And we're recording here in Steel Pixel Studios located in downtown Bethlehem. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.